And we talk about how important it is to have an air fryer.
Oh my gosh, life-changing.
My entire life. So I don't know about you because I just met you, and obviously now we have the same core values, but I'm not a cook by nature. And now I'm like marinating flank steak and had a little chicken thigh emergency, which
There
is
it is.
late to our podcast.
I'm not a chef either or a cook. My wife was a celebrity chef in LA.
Wait, you
Uh,
were?
my wife was,
Oh, I was like,
not me. No, no,
that's a
no.
hell of a story because your story is already so fantastic to begin with. You're
No,
like, mm-hmm.
definitely not me. But I'll tell you, whenever I'm cooking for the both of us, I go straight to the air fryer.
Well, because it never lets you down.
Never lets me down.
I mean, there are a few very reliable things in this world, and one is an air fryer.
I agree.
Well, apologies for being late. I'm incredible. First of all, you can usually tell the time by me, and then you're ex-military, so it's just a big embarrassing day. I'm working a lot of skills right now to manage my emotions around this conversation, but then we have air fryers in common, so I think we'll make it work.
Very good.
Thank you so
I have
much for coming.
learned, yeah, my pleasure. And I've learned like just over the course of my life as I've grown, I am just in less of a hurry. And
Oh.
so we can be late. It's okay.
You know what I was thinking while I was being late is how incredible when I'm sort of not in my wisest mind, how unbelievably dysregulated I can get by people being late.
Mm-hmm.
And
What's the
I was,
story you tell yourself when you're late or when people are late?
I don't know. So thanks for coaching me. Let me know what I owe you at the end of the podcast. I think the story, okay. Yeah. I mean, I think I make it mean like they don't value my time or they
Sure.
don't value me.
Yeah.
I don't matter. That's really my old trauma story. Yeah, and I was just having such compassion while I was late. So I was pretty unavoidably late. I guess I was avoidably late, but nevertheless, I was like, yeah. And this happens to me usually when I'm running late because I'm such a stickler for it. And I'm like, it's really hard to be on time sometimes.
It is. We're doing the best we can do.
We're all doing the best we can do. Well, anyway, I'm so excited to hear about you. I've read a lot about you. I listened to some podcasts. We have this common friend named Chase.
Chase Tuning,
Best.
first class.
First class. An altruistic connector. That's what I call him. He just
Yes.
connects people and he's always right. And he said, this, you want to have this guy in your podcast. So I do tell, and your story is fabulous. And I love a story. I love anybody who says, what's the story you tell yourself when you're running, when people are making you angry when they're late? That's really my love language. But your story is my love language. And I'm sure you have a really quick version of it so that we can get to the nitty gritty. So share it with us.
Oh, the quick version is grew up in the
Mm.
Texas Panhandle,
Yeah. Where's that? What's the Texas Panhandle?
the very, very top of Texas. So I was literally 7 miles south of the Oklahoma border.
Okay.
So tumbleweeds and tornadoes and rattlesnakes.
Oh my. Mhm.
Yes, I know. But I like to say that I was born and they put a football in my crib before they handed me to my mother.
So like very Friday Night Lights vibes, yeah.
Very Friday Night Lights, yeah. And football was like, can I hate to do this for some reason. This headset is making so many noises. I'm gonna switch
Do
real
you?
quick. I
Do you?
apologize.
That's why we have editing.
Um, okay, are you there?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry about that. This
Oh
one's
no.
not much better, but we'll try. I don't know what's going on with these headsets. God damn it.
I hear you. I gave up the
Uh,
headset long ago.
I've got to. Chase recommended these, and so I do what
Oh,
Chase.
yeah. I'm, I'm old and I love being old, but I was on a podcast with a bunch of young kids and none of them were wearing earphones. And I was like, wait, we don't have to wear earphones. This is
Yeah,
amazing.
right. I love these, but for some reason, I don't know if it's because they've been in a box.
Well, your mic sounds great. So I don't know what's
Okay,
you want to
as long
process
as
what's
you're not,
bothering you. I'm here for it.
yeah,
No,
no problem.
I'm happy.
The quick version of my story: grew up in the Texas Panhandle. Football quickly.
No. Tell us. I don't
Yes.
know. Oh my gosh. Caleb, we're sitting here talking about how
Please.
important it is to go slow.
Okay.
What do you feel like? They were just like going to rush through our podcast. No.
Go.
What are the important things that me and my beautiful community who are here just trying to get to the bottom of it all and get some contentment, we need to know about your origin story?
Yeah, I have been somebody historically that has always had this intuitive knowing that there is more. There has been kind of this deep underlying ache in my bones that knows that there is something missing, that there's something more. And I have, ever since I was a young boy, chased that ache.
Mm.
And I, for the longest time, thought that I would be able to satisfy it by doing more, by achieving more, by being more. And that, took me from the red dirt roads of the Texas Panhandle all the way to the United States Military Academy at West Point, where my freshman year, I played college football. My freshman year, I was all conference. My sophomore year, I'm now one of the top collegiate football players in all of college football America. My junior year, I'm the captain of our team. And my senior year, I find myself where arguably every player, football player, at one point in time dreams about being, and that's at Radio City Music Hall at the NFL draft, where I hear the commissioner of the NFL, Roger Goodell, announce my name in front of the entire football world that I was just selected by the Detroit Lions in the NFL draft. And so it was in the NFL when I got to this, this epitome or this idea of a way of life that I've told myself for so many years that if I could just get there, if I could just accomplish this, if I could just make this happen, that ache would dissipate.
Mm.
And as we know, as I'm saying this out loud, we know that's just not the story. It's not how it unfolds. And it was in the middle of my childhood dream where I realized there was no amount of external work that would ever reconcile this internal war that I was feeling. And at that time in my life, I didn't have the tools or the understanding or the emotion skills to navigate the journey that was in front of me in a healthy way. And so, in the middle of the childhood dream, I start coping in the most unhealthiest of ways. And I kind of realized that if something doesn't change and change soon, it's only a matter of time before the whole sports world is going to, or my parents are going to be, getting a phone call letting them know that their son is no longer with them. And so I got released from the Kansas City Chiefs my third year in the NFL, and my agent called me to tell me that the Atlanta Falcons were bringing me in for a workout, and it looked promising. And my response was, I can't.
Mm.
I can't keep living life like this. I can't keep using all of my energy just trying to hold together this image of a man, this idea of a man that I think I'm supposed to be, hold together this dream that I just have to keep alive. I can't keep living like this, white knuckling my way through life in hopes that one day it's finally going to be enough. Meanwhile, constantly, no matter how much I do, it's mirroring back to me that is still not enough. And at this time in my life, I'm finding myself the type of tired that more sleep doesn't solve.
Yeah.
And so
Psychic exhaustion, right?
yeah, big time. And so I told my agent, I'm done. I'm hanging up my cleats. It's time to go and discover who in the hell Caleb Campbell really is. And through a strange series of events, I went from playing in front of, I don't know, 80,000 people to moving to Canada, where I found an organization through, again, a strange series of events that I don't know what it was, but there was a knowing in me. There was an awareness in me that I was supposed to be there. And so I left the game of football. I moved to Canada, didn't know a soul at this organization. I, honest to God, I walked in and I said, hey, you don't know me. I don't really know you, but here's my story. Can you help me? And I'll never forget the president of the organization. He had tears in his eyes and he says, yeah, I think we can help you. And I'm not exaggerating when I say I moved into their basement inside of that organization. I woke up the next day, and for the next 5 years, Molly, I swept floors, I washed windows, I cleaned bathrooms. I essentially became a glorified janitor of this organization and did whatever was asked of me. And I did that in exchange for free therapy. And so that I could better understand what in the hell just happened to me. I could better understand, why is it never enough? And I just started to kind of go back and heal all of these childhood woundings and change the stories and the narratives that I've been telling myself for so long. And so I say all of that because I have been somebody that now on the other side of it, I've realized that in my pursuit of trying to, work my way out of the ache, I only intensified the problem. My life was so much about this upward trajectory. And now I've realized it's less about an upward trajectory and more about a downward descent.
Mm.
And
A
that has
downward
kind
descent into ourselves, you mean?
yeah, it's less about there will always come a time in every one of our lives where moving our life forward isn't by doing more. It's not by hustling more. It's not by holding on tighter. It's actually learning to let go, to resist less, to accept who you are and where you are. It's the paradox. The way up is actually the way down. And I'm kind of in the season where I have been, professionally speaking, and very in different areas. But I think, my heartbeat is to help people who have taken their lives as far as they can take it, and they know that working harder is not the answer, and they're in this kind of liminal space. What once was is no longer, but the new has not yet appeared. How do I navigate this in between space so that I can create the inner capacity to step into this outward expansion that I know is possible for my life?
Mm. Well, that's a really great intro. I only have 10,000 questions and
Let's do it.
30 minutes to do it. I'm finding myself so anxious because I have so many questions and I so rarely take notes when someone's talking. But do you have any idea about where that war came from?
Yeah, I was 7 years old and I had just scored the game-winning touchdown in the community-wide all-star flag football championship game.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Texas, Molly.
I get it. I watched Friday Night
Thing,
Lights. That's a big
right,
deal. Yeah.
the only thing that would have been a bigger deal than this is if I would have been cast to play Jesus in the school Christmas play. um, but I'll never forget, Molly, that I scored that touchdown, and I remember looking over to the sidelines and scanning the sidelines, and I was looking for my biggest fan, who happens to be my mother. And I remember catching eyes with her, and I ran as fast as my little legs could possibly run. And when I got to her, and I remember her like it was yesterday. She bent over, she grabbed my face, and she said, "Son, I'm so proud of you. You scored the game-winning touchdown. I love you so much." And it was just this innocent exchange that's taken me years of realizing that this innocent exchange that I can remember so vividly and so deeply, um, where I it's where I learned that my performance and productivity in life shapes my acceptance and my sense of belonging.
Yeah. So you really internalized her sense of needing you to be good in order
Yeah.
for you to get her love,
Yeah.
even
And
though
so
it's not her intention. Yeah.
yeah, it definitely wasn't her intention, but and that's a story that just is
It's a good
replayed.
note for the parents
Yeah.
listening, though, Caleb. Can we just also say,
Yeah.
parents who say to me, like, I'm only as happy as my least happy child. I was like, please don't put that
Oh,
responsibility on them. Please don't do that.
no,
Please
no,
don't
no,
do that.
no, no.
Please stop.
Man, it's
This
the
is my
difference.
dance space. This is your dance space, right? Like we need
Yes.
separation.
Mm. It's so, so important. That could be a whole other
I
conversation that
mean,
we could
I
have.
know. I know.
Because when I look back at my journey and so much of the onslaught of mental health challenges that I have faced, and again, it wasn't intentional, but it was the enmeshment. It was my mother living vicariously through me. It was my mother fighting my battles. It was my mother being a helicopter parent. It was all of these things that my mom thought that was the best way that she could love me, but in fact, it it created so much inner angst, so much anxiety, so much turmoil, and
Can you
so
unpack it? I mean, it's so funny what people come on the show for and what ends up happening. But like, can you? I guess I'm telling you, there's 1,000
Sure.
helicopter parents listening
Yeah.
right now. What did it feel like to have this energetic knowing that she was putting all of her eggs in your basket? And you knew that because clearly you're a sensitive, awake person, as you know, us spiritual beings are. How did it feel to you knowing that?
Well, I didn't know that as a kid.
No, no, no. But like,
Yeah.
how did it? Of course not. Well, I don't know. Sounds like you
No,
did,
I
like
didn't.
somewhere
Well,
inside of yourself.
my mom, like our attachment styles are created by our primary caretaker.
Right.
And my mom, in the way that she raised me, I thought that like it was healthy. It was like my form of connection, and
Sure.
pleasing her was the way that I sustained that connection.
Mm.
And so that became like this idea that my productivity and my performance is a prerequisite to deeper connection. And
Yeah.
that's what I've craved ever, like that's what we all crave if we're aware of it or not. It
That's
just
the
kind
last
of
question on the show, Caleb. What are we really craving? And we locked it in at 17 minutes. So
there
yeah,
we
I
go.
mean, we're craving acceptance and connection.
Yeah.
And the note that you got unintentionally was, you got to be really a good boy all the time and be highly performing. And then I love
Highly
you.
performing. Yeah. And so it just created this immense pressure.
Yeah.
And also it jeopardized the emotional safety of our relationship, that whenever I felt like I wasn't enough, I didn't want to actually bring that conversation to the table, because then she would see that I'm not as strong as she thinks that I am.
Mm. So you
And
were
then that
taking
would
care of her in
jeopardize.
that way.
Absolutely. And so that was a big thing. Like I have been responsible for my mother, and my father was around, but my father was like your traditional stoic, masculine. Like he was a bull rider growing up, and he was a cowboy.
Was
And
that his real job?
well, he rode, my older brother is a bull rider as well. And he's just, my dad's just been a cowboy his whole life. And
Right.
so
Like
I didn't, that's
stereotypical, like not, no feelings, no nothing like that.
yeah,
Yeah.
100% through and through. And still today, it's like, hey, dad, how are you? And it's like, oh,
What
fuck.
does he think about you, your journey?
You know, I, part of my healing, I think, has been grieving the loss of my parents while they're still here.
Mm.
And I say that because I love my parents dearly. I honestly can look back, and I think this is the beautiful, the beautiful part of healing. I can look back at my parents and be like, fuck, y'all really did the best you knew how to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like you were operating from your own system that unfortunately was still full of a lot of your own trauma, pain, and experiences that were not yet alchemized or healed or you know, whatever you want to say. I've had to grieve the loss of my parents while they're still here, because I've recognized that they'll never fully understand why I live the life that I live. Now, like where I'm at today, they can see like, oh,
Yeah.
you have a successful life.
Right. Like he
Like
turned
it
out
makes
okay.
sense. It turns out okay. But
Yeah.
I'll be honest with you, like I don't know what my dad really feels, because he's never communicated it. And I've no longer tried to ask that question.
Right.
I've realized just because you're my blood, it still doesn't mean that you are my family. And that's hard. That's really hard. And I know sometimes that will like kind of ruffle the feathers on some folks, but I'll be
Oh no,
honest
not in
with
this
you,
show. Not on
my
this show.
parents, my parents don't really get access to my heart space.
Both of them. So
Both of
this
them.
stuff, interesting. So it's like
And
your dad is like, you decided to not go to an empty well looking for water, it sounds like, but
totally.
which like makes a ton of sense. I'm fascinated by this, even just from a masculine
Yeah.
perspective. But what was the tangling and untangling with your mom that you don't have like a closeness to her now?
Yeah. So it was the same. It was the same kind of experience as I began to heal and unpack and begin to like just transform my inner reality. I just recognized the necessity for boundaries, right? I've been able to look back at my life and been like, wow, you have lived so vicariously through me, and my heart aches for you, because it means that you've really never been able to live out your own dreams and your own deep desires. And so my success is your success,
Mm.
and you need me to do well so that you could feel like you were a success. And there
Wow.
just became this moment in my life where like I am not carrying that fucking burden any longer.
Wow.
And that was a big moment, because like, and I'm not, and I talk so freely with this because this has been a decade long journey for me, where like not disappointing your parents, especially when you grew up close, it's hard for me to actually say that like, yo, just because you're my parents doesn't actually make you my family. Like I've got my soul family, you're my people, you're my parents, but you genuinely don't get access to my heart unless you're actually seeking it, unless you actually are coming with an open curiosity to understand why I've chosen the life that I've chosen. Because believe me, I am not getting into a conversation, to try to justify or try to, like, I'm not going to talk about the things that you want to talk about to confirm that what you believe to be true about religion and
Right.
politics and everything else about life
Well, I
is
literally was
real.
just thinking that of like when you're talking about a traditional Texas family, I mean, you're talking
Totally.
about people that are like family values, even if it doesn't feel cohesive to you.
Yeah.
And it sounds a little bit like Marsha Linehan is my teacher in therapy. You know, she says when one person, you know, that every relationship in the whole world is transactional.
Hmm.
And when one person changes, the whole relationship changes, right? That's all it takes to change a relationship is that we change.
Sure.
And so it's such an interest. So many people who I help have this problem in
Mm.
different ways. This is a huge problem in healing, right? Is that like when we heal and other people aren't on board with our healing, like what do we do about it? And so
Mm.
often, like that attachment wound and the codependency and the addictions and all of it are like, no, go back to them.
Yeah.
Right. Like the amount of DMs I get where it's like, my family's not on board with me giving up sugar, even though I'm
Sure.
dying. What do I do? I mean, and I'm
Sure.
like, that's more than a DM can help you with, but it's a brave and hard thing to do. I mean, this whole story is fascinating. I have to pause this part of our
Sure.
conversation and ask you about something else because so you're in this life and part of it sounds like you're excited about it. Like what made you decide to go into the military? Just the Texas of it all or
It's I'm a 4 on the Enneagram, and so like my heart has always craved independence and significance and like being the different one.
Mhm.
There's always been like this uniqueness of expression that I continuously try to express that makes me unique and different. And so whenever I came or whenever I was in college or in high school and West Point started to recruit me, like West Point was different.
Right.
It's not your traditional college. It's a notch up. It's above and beyond. Like you're doing things that no other college students are doing. You're going places no other college students are necessarily going. And I just saw that as like, oh, this place was made for me because it's like everything in my life craves to be special, to be different. And so West Point, in a lot of ways in the history of the academy, was the ecosystem that accurately reflected the internal landscape of what my heart craved.
Do you think there was any part of it that was like, oh, I want to be the best also like
Absolutely.
with your mom that and that's just the highest end of what you can do when it comes to a
Oh,
career in a way,
absolutely. Because
right?
my mother, she saw West Point as like an
Yeah, I get.
opportunity for her because she gets to tell her friends, my son goes to West Point.
Wow.
And so, and um, I knew that's what she wanted for me. And
Mhm.
again, I didn't want to disappoint her. And so I think that played a very large role in me making that decision. But I'll be honest with you, I'd probably go back and make the same decision again. It played a role in my life, and looking back, it was exactly where I was supposed to be.
Yeah.
But you know, I think the a big transition in my life is, you know, the majority of my life I have longed to find significance, right? Like, how do I find significance? And I searched, I ran, I worked harder than anyone trying to find the significance. And I thought West Point was a stepping stone into this significance. And so, and a big transition has been obviously like, you know, no longer looking for significance because I'm living from a place of significance.
Well, right, everything. But that's I think
Yeah,
that's my real curiosity when I listen to the story. We don't know each other that well, but I'm have plenty
we're
of
besties
trauma.
already.
I know, but like we do. Um, but I used to weigh 325 pounds and was suicidal and all of the stuff. And I always try to listen to stories from that part of me because I always think that somebody is listening to this. And I'm just so curious about this, right? Like, so you're there and I get it in my awake, aware, healthy self. I get this story on such a profound level. I get it. You're like in the NFL, you like made it, you made it, you made it, and you're still like empty inside. And I've sat in enough 12-step rooms in my life where I'm like, we've all heard that story.
Sure.
And I'm so curious to the person sitting listening right now who like is so depressed and is like, yeah, this is what I would say. My sickest self would be like, good for you, guy. Like you had you had all of it so you could go internal.
Mm.
What if I don't even have it?
Mm.
Like, don't you think that if I lose these 100 pounds, that would make a fundamental difference? Don't you think if I got out of this poverty that I am, that would make a difference? This, I think it's really complicated. This, like, I believe you me. I'm on such a journey right now, like all my coaches say to me is like, do less, sit in this pain. And I want to like smack them through the Zoom. Right. But I'm like listening to you talk about like this big career and you're like, it would be, I thought this would be enough. I thought this would be enough. Like, can you walk me through that feeling a little bit for somebody sitting there being like, I just want to be able to make rent. And you guys are telling me
Totally.
that this is an inside job,
No, I think what you're saying is profound and necessary and important. And I want to be clear that that's not like my part of, I'm talking about the second half of my story.
Oh, I love it. I think it's so important to
So there's a whole
validate that
first
like
half.
pain is pain though, right?
Pain is pain,
Like,
absolutely. And honestly, there is no healing without feeling safe. And so that it's hard to heal when you're living in an environment where you're barely getting by, you're barely holding on.
right.
Like it takes a lot of action and a lot of effort and a lot of work, and it really does, to create emotional ecosystem or safe ecosystems that can help facilitate this process for you. But if you're at this place where it's like, that's great, but you mean to tell me my life's not going to change if I don't lose 100 pounds, then I'm like, by all means, go lose 100 pounds.
Right.
Like, do the work. Like, by all means,
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
$1 million.
I love that. It's actually in a way dialectic, right? They're both true, right? Like
Absolutely, they're both true. It's necessary, but when
your
you
life will
lose 100,
probably get better and you still really may be empty
yes,
inside
and
after
then
you lose
that's
100
when me and
pounds.
you have a conversation. Like, I want, and this has been my riff. I've had to change my keynote for students, for like high achieving students. I spend a lot of time in corporate America and a lot of time in schools, specifically like high achieving schools, just because that's my story. Where they still want the multi-million-dollar contract, they still want the Ferrari, they still want this bigger and better life, and I'm like, fuck yeah, go get it, work your ass off, go get it, right? But then when you have it and it's still not enough,
Yeah.
now me and you can have a heart to heart. Well,
I
now
think
we can
that's
have this
right.
conversation.
I think that's,
So
I mean, I think
yeah,
it's true to say sometimes money makes it better. Sometimes
absolutely.
getting healthy in your body makes it better. And if that emptiness is still there, it will be accelerated and it
Yeah,
will be enlightened much quicker. And it's almost
absolutely.
like when you had all of the things that you wanted, it was the darkest, sounds like it was one of the darkest times for you.
Yes. And honestly, I think people want a framework. People want a formula. It's not black and white. Like,
Well, not
it's right.
enlightenment. No.
It's not. So it's like, what we have to learn how to do is to listen to our own intuition, listen to our own bodies. And so, like, if you are feeling like you really want to lose 100 pounds, or you're feeling like you really want to make more money, then go after that. Lean into that.
Right.
Honor that.
I
And then do
wonder.
the work to make it
Yeah.
happen. And
Well,
then
it's it,
allow.
right. No, it's so smart what you're saying. Like, good job. Um, but it's funny, like, because even the system in which you would need to get off the couch or take a risk to receive help or be open to healing would be the same skill set you would need to heal your
Sure.
insides,
Sure. And
right?
this all came to like a head for me when I was in Canada. I was
Well,
about
what
two.
happened before Canada? Are we allowed to talk about coping in the most healthy of ways? Or sorry, but like how much like a
Oh
drug addict?
yeah,
I
it
want to
was
know what happened.
yeah, like I was just living every day with, like white knuckling my way through life. I had this image. They called me America's athlete.
Oh
I
boy.
I was a
I'm so
West Point
sorry.
graduate. I'm an Army officer, and now I'm
Oh
an
God.
NFL linebacker. And so
That
on the
makes me like,
outside,
that makes me hold my breath. And that's not even my experience. If somebody put
uh,
that kind of label on me, oh my God, I haven't had a drink in a long time. That makes me want to drink. That is so much pressure.
it was, but there was
Jeez.
also like how I found my identity. It's how I found my acceptance. It's how I found my sense of belonging in this world. So I wanted to do everything that I could to sustain that title, to sustain that image.
Right.
So in the NFL, it was kind of like this balancing act of holding it all together and just doing enough to get by so that people wouldn't see the real me.
Mm.
like doing everything that I could to perfect this external image, to perfect this facade so that you don't actually see that I'm falling apart on the inside. And that living that tension, living in that war, and like trying to sustain the NFL because that's the highest level of acceptance and belonging, like the fear of
Mm.
losing that, it just began to cripple me and begin to paralyze me. It took a toll on my performance. It took a toll on my sense of self. And then that's just when I'm like, I was hating myself because I knew the way that I was doing life, like it was working against me. Like I knew, like holding it all in and trying to be somebody that I'm not, like every day was another day of self betrayal.
Mm.
And in that self betrayal, I eventually went from my greatest ally to my worst enemy. Like
Mm.
I became my own worst enemy, and I hated myself for constantly living this lie of self betrayal day after day. And that's when it just like I just I couldn't live with that pain without numbing it.
And
And
what
so
were you using drugs and alcohol, or were you?
definitely drugs, alcohol, and sex.
Mm.
It was
It's
like
a nice
oh,
trifecta.
a 72-hour bender in Vegas
Yeah.
would, seemingly curb the pain for 2 months before I had to go and do it all over again.
Wow. That's empty.
Yeah. And
I
it's,
relate to that.
how many times I've been in the shower, trying to scrub the filth off of me
Right.
and just weeping, like, and telling myself that I've got to change. I'm going to change, but then go back and just repeat the same behaviors over and over again. And then the hatred, the self hatred that would come from that,
Yeah.
was unbearable.
Yeah. How did you as a man, not the easiest thing you did, to say the least. How did it occur to you that you needed a therapeutic intervention or some kind of emotional intervention?
Yeah, I often say that at this season of my life, I was the least self-aware person you've ever met, but there was still an awareness that was active here
Right.
because when I left the NFL, like West Point, we take care of our own. And so, my email and my story that I was looking for a job now went out to the entire Army football distro. And so anybody who was somebody in corporate America that played Army football, my name ended up in their inbox. And I'm telling you, I had 100 calls within 3 days from
Wow.
the CEO of 7-Eleven to CEO of Yahoo, from, medical sales companies inviting me over to tour their campus and to invite me and to offer me jobs. And like, I had all of these opportunities, but there was something in me that knew I was just about to recreate another football in my life. Like,
1000%. That's literally what I was saying. Like
right.
that's the same
Like there
exact
was
thing you're
something
about to
that
do.
just
Right.
knew that nothing was going to change until I changed. And I think this was the hard part because I wanted to demonize football. I wanted to place the blame on football. Like football is this evil
Very
system that's
toxic,
just
right?
very toxic and all greed
Right.
and all this shit. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I wanted to point the finger at it, but I realized like, fuck, football wasn't the enemy. Like the football was just the ecosystem that mirrored back the enemy that's alive in me. And I
Right.
think I use the
Or
word
the
enemy,
healing
use
that needs
the
to happen
healing that
within
needs to
you.
happen.
Come
Yes.
on. There ain't no
Yes.
enemy in you. You're too
Yes.
sweet.
And I said that after that. I said I'm using enemy in quotes here because
Yeah.
it was God in me, actually, I would say.
I would
Uh,
agree. I would
yeah.
agree.
And
Like the
so
most desperate. It's like one of my teachers always says that that there's people in my life, they're called like shadow. She calls them like shadow friends.
absolutely.
And like they just have taught me everything shadow relationships, whatever, shadow
It's
experiences.
Barbara
So
Brown
when did
Taylor.
it occur to you that you needed to go as a football playing military man that you should go to therapy? Well, sorry,
It
become a
wasn't even
janitor and go to therapy
it wasn't
in
even
Canada.
therapy necessarily. I was in my aunt's basement, like opening up my fourth bottle of wine. And this is,
Mhm.
after I left the NFL, not knowing what I'm doing with my life, having a pity party, hating myself, hating life.
Wait,
And
what did your parents think about you leaving the NFL? Not pleased.
yeah, they just didn't understand why I would give up. And this is a big part of my story, a big part of my message is letting go is not like giving up. Letting go isn't a sign of weakness. Like it's sometimes the most bravest and most courageous thing that we can do, and it's the epitome of strength. Um, And
Well,
my,
and can I say one more thing just for them,
sure.
those listening, because it's a very relevant message to those listening. And also, like, not everybody needs to be in agreement when you're going to make really big life-changing decisions.
Oh,
Like, I don't
oh,
like, I want to say I wasn't like thinking your parents were going to be like, oh my God, amazing.
congratulations.
Yes. Definitely do not go on for the Falcons. Go to
Um,
Canada and
yeah,
heal.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and that's what I think people think when we're about to make that everybody's like, yeah, Ma, totally. Yeah, you should totally just like stop your life, go into treatment, take care. You take care of
Right.
you. Everyone's like, what are we going to do? Right. Because that's the transaction of it all.
Yes. I will say that, like, this is part of the journey of taking back your life. It's learning
Mm,
how to listen to your own inner voice and saying yes to it and trusting it despite the people who are the closest to you not understanding it. Like, that's a lonely, lonely journey. Like, if you look at Mary Oliver, the journey,
yeah.
like, I strode out into the darkness and these people and their voices were saying, grabbing at my ankle saying, mend my life, mend my life, mend my life. But as I continue to stride and to walk out into the darkness, I begin to recognize a voice, that which I can call my own. And like, that's the beautiful image of the invitation of what we're all being invited into. And I'm telling you, like, part of that journey is realizing that the people that have come with you up until this point are not always the people that are going to continue with you. And that's a hard, hard, hard experience. There's so much grief involved, there's so much loss involved, and it's not easy, but it's important and it's necessary, I would argue, for you to discover how to live a life of alignment and fulfillment that you're proud of,
Well,
not that
yeah.
other people are proud of, but that you're proud of.
It sounds like for you, it was like this really like ultimate gauntlet. It's like, am I going to choose me or am I going to continue to try to
Live
be,
up to all these other
yeah, be
expectations.
like for them? Yeah. I mean, and that's it. And I want to say, like, sure, you know this, but I think 90% of people just don't do that. And they live very small, addicted lives as a function of it. I always think, I mean, and I'll think this to the day I die, but more shamanistically, I think addiction is always has so
Mm,
much to do with the throat, the throat chakra,
it's
not
good.
telling our truth and
It's good.
having our head and our heart being real in a real dispute. And it ends
Yep.
up in our throat. And we end up doing things to try to pound our throat down or numb our throat. And
Yep.
eating disorders, I think, are largely that, and the
Yeah.
experience, and certainly my experience of them, and thousands of people listening. So, what did you learn in what was this, like a therapeutic community? Where'd you go? Like, could we be
No, it
more
was a
specific?
church.
I love specifics.
Yeah, it was actually a church.
You hadn't lived in a church? This is a great story. I
So
love the
I would say,
screenplay.
like, you have this story that I've presented to you, but there's a whole other story that is actually the driving force behind all of this. And this is me trying to experience God.
Mm,
Like, I've always, I grew up in an evangelical, flag waving, talking in tongues, spirit filled church.
yeah.
Um, it's so funny when I look at them now and I'm like, holy shit, if because like this Christian nationalism that's pervading our country, like, let's get fucking real. Like, it's all the people that raised me. It is.
Mm,
It's 100% this. It's the church that I was raised in.
wow.
Um,
It
and
must
that's
be
a whole other
that must
conversation.
be yeah, it must
Yeah.
be a whole different therapy
Yeah, it's a whole
session.
different conversation. But
Yeah.
um I've always been I would say, like, a man after God. And what I was taught to believe growing up was, like, there is a separation between me here, God out there. And so my life was so much because it was literally like prophesied over my life when I was 7 years old that I would play in the NFL. And
Mm,
so the NFL wasn't obviously just the way I found acceptance and love and belonging in this world. It was also God's purpose for my life. So walking away from the NFL in a lot of ways looked like me, or the story I told myself, it was me turning my back on God. And so staying in the fight, staying in the struggle was like my way of needing God and needing faith. And let me tell you, you can have a really fucking codependent relationship with God.
say the least. I know it just all depends what your conception of God is,
Totally.
right?
Right. And so I the church, I will say that when I was in my aunt's basement, I was on Twitter and I found a series of tweets that for the first time in my life, somebody put language to my experience. And it was actually this church. They were putting language to, like, this time in the wilderness, and the experience of the wilderness, and realizing that like there is no new life without first a death. And I kind of realized that there's a part of me that was dying. Like, holy shit, there's this metaphorical death happening. Like this way of life that has gotten to me to here, it's no longer working and it's got to die. It's got to be let go of. And so they put language to that. And that's where like there was this knowing that gravitated me towards them.
Yeah.
And it was also a part of me kind of telling myself like, oh, I need to get back to my roots. I need to get back to God. And so the church was kind of this, it was necessary. It was this very safe ecosystem where I could begin to feel safe enough to peel back the layers, to drop the facade. Nobody saw me as America's athlete. They saw me as Caleb.
And you didn't like worry, you didn't worry about money. Like how did that's like, I mean, that's literally what I would worry about. Like, how am I
so
going
money has never driven me. I've never like I'll live without. Like I'm perfectly fine with living without. Like it doesn't, money is still something that I'm like, my stories around money, again, another podcast.
we have like 18
Yeah.
podcasts.
But yeah, so money, nothing could compare. The ultimate wealth that I could tap into is finding this sense of inner peace.
Well,
Like
you were just so burned down to your ashes that it didn't matter. You were just like, I need to
I
rise.
didn't make $1 for 5 years. I blew through all my savings. I was teetering on the edge of going bankrupt. Like I didn't literally make $1 for five. Like it did not matter to me.
Right.
And that was just kind of this. I don't know. That was just it
Oh, that
cost
was
me everything. It literally cost me everything. Metaphorically and literally.
It also sounds like the best idea you ever had, or that was ever given to you, rather, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so, and again, it was in this ecosystem of the church that I started to repair and rebuild. I started to feel safe enough to shed these layers and start to really heal. But I'll never forget sitting at the back of this church almost 5 years, a little after 5 years in, and what I've now been able to do is to reconnect to my center. I've been able to intuitively hear the knowing that's leading me and guiding me in my life. I've been able to like integrate it and be connected to us and live from this place. And it was so interesting because I got to this point where I was sitting at the back of the church, and up until this point, it was like in my head, I'm staying here as long as ever. Like I'm just staying here. Like these people transformed my life. I'm going to be committed to anybody else that walks through these doors and they're looking for healing and hope, and I'm going to be there for them. And that was my plan. And I'll never forget sitting in the back of this church, the same knowing that I had when it was time to leave the NFL, that I had when I knew that I knew that I knew it was the least logical decision, but it was time to move to Canada. That same knowing began to surface in my life. And I was like, holy shit, it's time to leave the church. And that created a lot of turmoil because my leaders at church didn't agree with this. They didn't agree. And I'm like, hold on, the same God that you all taught me to reconnect to is now asking me to leave, but because it doesn't fit your priorities and your needs, suddenly what I'm hearing is not God. And like I've was able to trust
the God inside of you.
the God inside of me.
Yeah.
And so at this time, like the church and the ecosystem, and this is still my problem with the church, I think it's great, but we continue to perpetuate the story that there is something outside of ourselves that we need to access to save ourselves.
Yeah.
Fucking not true. And I think the healing journey is the collapse of this illusion of separation. And I started to taste that illusion of separation collapsing in my life and realizing, I think it's William Blake that says, Jesus is God, so am I, and so are you.
Perfect.
And like that started to become so real to me. And staying inside of the church was the antithesis of the love that I was experiencing in my life. And so I left the church, which again, this point that I'm saying over and over again is like the people that have come with you up into this point are not always the same people that walk with you on the other side of the journey. And that hit me hard. And that was really hard to let go. It was really hard to say goodbye. But again, through another strange series of events, I found myself walking the beach in Venice, outside in LA. And the winds of change blew across my face. And I was like, holy fuck, I'm moving to Los Angeles.
I love what you're saying. I mean, I don't know. I always have a teacher and he would be like, Mal, healers are humans, and when we put, I think we put these unrealistic expectations on all humans, right? You're talking about your parents. I had a very similar thing happen with my mother. My father died when I was really little, which screwed my whole conception of God, killed himself. And
Oh,
my
wow.
stuff with my mom was very similar because I was just so scared she was going to leave. And so I would just do anything, that on top of all of it. And when I gave up sugar and flour and alcohol, it was like, if you want to know why you're doing those things, stop doing those things. You'll know them really quickly. And I had this whole thing with my mom. Thank God my mom doesn't listen to my podcast. Thank God in this moment, she don't want to hear those. And, and I had to stop talking to her completely. Like my insides, like I had to stop that sober, stone cold sober. I couldn't speak to her for like 2 years. It was a much longer story than that, but I just remember, and I was in a lot of therapy at the time too, great therapy. And I remember my mom saying to me, like, what will you do if I die? And I said, I think I'm trying to figure that out because I couldn't like coexist. I couldn't I couldn't figure out my own life while I was like enmeshed in hers. And so but this idea of these healers being human and this, like, because I think this, I think this conversation has to do with everything, like coaching culture and diet culture and healing culture. It's like, you don't have to stay with one person for the other person is not here to heal you. They're here to guide you. And sometimes the exit ramp is 3 miles long. And sometimes the exit ramp is 300 miles long. And it's about like our own journey. It's not about staying in the church because like there's such a case to be made that you're like, you guys saved my life. I'm here forever. But you don't have that kind of spiritual voice inside of you. You're like, I gotta go. And I'm sorry you're having a hard time with that. That's a you problem, not a me problem.
Yeah.
It's
And I think
incredible.
it's a big, I love that you share that. And also thanks for sharing some of your story.
You're delightful. I'd share
Yeah.
anything with you. and
Um,
and there's 10,000 people listening, but whatever.
yeah, but what you're saying is so important. Like everything that we engage in, like if the coaches that you're engaging with, if the churches that you're engaging with, if the people that you're engaging with is not helping you to trust yourself, like if it's not empowering you to reconnect to your own knowing and trust your knowing, even when your knowing runs the opposite direction of what is deemed to be the right way, quote unquote, like it's time to get new people. It's
That's
time
right.
to get new
That like
communities.
brings, honestly, that like makes me want to weep. I wish, if nothing else, if like people could just know this. And it's like everything's temporary anyway. And that's what ends up happening in bad therapeutic relationships, coaching relationships, everything. It's like the over reliance ends up negating the work.
Yes. It's codependence.
And that's that codependency you're talking about in the beginning.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
It's
I think
bonkers.
it's literally like when you look back at this entire journey, it's honestly, it's learning how to trust yourself. It's learning to realize that I am the answer that I'm looking for. Like, and like for me to experience the life that I want, it can't happen outside of myself. I have to actually trust myself. And how do we trust ourselves? Was we say yes to the own inner knowings. We say yes to the inner nudges that are pointing us and taking us down a path that doesn't make always logical sense. In fact, I would argue that 99.9% of the time your heart is speaking to you, it's not going to fucking make logical
Love
sense.
it.
Right?
Well, and it's like not pretty. Like
No.
I know we're like far from like your days in the NFL, but like nobody says no to the Atlanta. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm sure in that moment it didn't make sense. You're like, what am I doing? Like, I can't believe I'm saying no to this. Like, that's the problem. The other piece of it, I think, in diet culture, coaching culture, life, whatever we're talking about, it's like, that's deemed like a stupid decision. It's like we make these decisions on this impulsive moment. Like, this is the story. Like, the story is changing my life. Like, thank God you didn't stay in the NFL and probably kill yourself, which what would have happened slowly or quickly.
Yes.
And I think that's the piece that we don't think of these, I don't know, left turns when we think we should be going right as like, oh, wow, maybe this is actually going to be a great thing or going to make
Oh,
sense
good.
later on. Or, I mean, that's my entire
Oh,
life is rooted in that.
absolutely. And I'm telling you, I'm so thankful I found a partner in my life that, you know, encourages me on this way of life, because this is how I live my life.
Can't
This is
imagine you could have a different kind of partner. I can't imagine. I don't
no,
even
it
know what
wouldn't
that would
work.
look. That would freak me out to no end. If you were like, yeah,
And this is what I know. This is what I'm talking about when I said there comes a time in everybody's life that moving our life forward isn't by doing more and holding on tighter and trying to make it work, but actually by resisting less and learning to let go, learning how to surrender. I think honestly, I am a strong believer, whether you're looking at religions or mysticism, when you're looking at the seasons of life. Let's just take the seasons. Like, the prerequisite for new spring is first a death, a winter.
yeah.
Right? The leaves have to fall. And when you look at our lives collectively, not only individually, but also collectively, and I know this is a story that so many of us are living out right now, like COVID was, and I'm not trying to undermine what happened during COVID, because it was literal death happening, but for everybody across the board who might not have lost loved ones or friends, everybody experienced a metaphorical death.
Yeah.
There is no going back to the way things once were, and there was a loss of dreams, there was a loss of money, there was a loss of desire, there was a loss of passion, there was a loss of a way of life. And so we've all experienced this metaphorical death, and I think it's necessary, because I feel like what we're moving into is new life, a new way of experiencing life. And that's going to reshape the way that we do life across the board. We're seeing systems that are no longer suffice, systems that no longer work begin to topple over.
Well, can I just say, unless we're holding on desperately.
Unless we're holding on
the old
tight. But
way.
here's the deal. You will blow up your life so hard and so much if you don't learn how to resist less. This is the journey that I feel like I would be so, bold to say everybody is on right now. We all know how to push the river of our lives forward. What we're being invited into is realizing that the river is already flowing, and what we have to learn how to do is actually rest.
Well, I think there might be some people listening who need to jump into the river.
Or
They're
that.
so self-hating. They're
Sure.
so scared of life.
Sure.
So I just want to say to them, the river is there. We want you in.
Yeah.
It's a little cold when you get in, but then, your temperature adjusts,
You're
all that cold plunging.
And there will be
then there are some of us,
in the river.
but I mean, the river metaphor works, right? There's some of us who are too scared to jump into the river. And there are some of us who are just
swimming
upstream, exhausted, and not even thinking like, oh, maybe I just need to relax for a minute and just like see where this river takes me.
Totally.
But it is effectively all about trust, right? And all about listening to that inner voice. If you could give one piece of advice, I don't like the word advice, but we'll just use it anyway. If you give one piece of knowing to somebody listening to do or not do one thing today, what would you tell them?
Take the time to grieve.
No big deal.
I'm being serious.
I believe you me.
I'm not talking. I think a lot of times people think that grief is like only a sign for the times when we lose a loved one. But I'm talking about the more ambiguous losses of life, the non-finite grief is what it's called. And it's the grief that's attached to the loss of the way of life, which it once was, or it's all around the grief that's attached to the unmet expectations around your life or the unfulfilled dreams around your life. We don't do this in our culture. We don't allow ourselves to grieve life not turning out the way that we expected it to turn out, or we hope that it turned out. And what we do is we have this uncanny ability of taking that grief and internalizing this pain and using it as fuel, using it as ambition, right? And we use it and it works for a while. It works. It really does. But at some point we have to ask ourselves, are we actually living or are we avoiding? And for so many of us, what we're doing is we're avoiding the hard things in our life. We're avoiding the pain in our lives. And when we're avoiding the pain in our lives, Barbara Brown Taylor is one of my favorite spiritual teachers and authors, writers in my life. And she says, it's not the sadness that sinks a person's life. It's the energy a person spends avoiding sadness that sinks a person's life. And so I want to suggest to you, it's not the grief, it's not the pain, it's not the fear, it's not the anger, it's not the shame. None of these things have the propensity and the power to sink your life. What's going to sink your life is the avoidance of these things. And right now, what we're doing is we're internalizing them and we're using them as fuel. And we think we're moving our lives forward, but we're not actually living as much as we're avoiding. And
That's
until
really
we take the
beautiful.
time to grieve, to really grieve and to feel into the pain that our life doesn't look the way that we wanted it to look or that we hoped that it looked, financially, emotionally, relationally, whatever it is, right? Those underlying currents are going to continue to wash over our lives, and we're going to be continuously spending all of our energy just trying to keep our head above water,
Yeah.
trying to get our next breath.
Yeah.
So
Or,
take,
and
so
like,
take
and then spending those intermittent times numbing the pain that comes up when we're not busy.
absolutely.
Oh, I mean, I'm changed. I'm changed from this. I love podcasts when, like, cause the podcast is what you're craving. Like when I
Mm,
leave without a crave, I feel
uh,
so full. I feel so full from this conversation. I'm so grateful to have met you, and probably
thanks
will
for
have you
having
on
me.
like 15 more times. So,
Do it. I'll podcast with you
hey, where
all the
can
time.
we find you if we want to
Yeah.
know everything about you? I obviously gave your bio, but and all of that,
Yeah.
but what's the best way to be connected to you, would you say?
Yeah, send me a note on my website. I try to answer them all the time. Just calebcampbell.me.
Oh, beautiful. And that'll all be in the show notes as like the
Yeah.
15 people we talked about today.
And
Thank
then,
you so
yeah.
much. Oh, wait, there's one
Perfect.
more?
Oh no, just my Instagram, Caleb at underscore Campbell. So Caleb underscore Campbell. Sorry.
Yeah. Caleb
Caleb.
underscore Campbell on
Yeah.
Instagram. I'm
Yeah.
following this minute.
Oh, thanks, Molly.
And you're amazing. I'm so glad to, just what a great story. It all makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Sometimes
it
like
does.
moments like this. I'm so glad
Thank
to
you.
have you on the show. Thank you.
Bless you.